Welcome back to the news today. This is One on One. It was 21 years ago that South Africa finally became an equal country. On April 27, 1994, South Africans voted in the country's first non-racial elections, and apartheid, that hated system of racial discrimination, finally came to an end. The date is enshrined in South Africa as Freedom Day, commemorated each year. In the 21 years since the first election, South Africa has traveled a rocky road. The races are now equal, but crime, corruption have skyrocketed, and there is still huge inequality between the races. My guest tonight is David Kaplan, former chairman of the South African Zionist Federation in Israel. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Lucy.
So one of the reasons, David, that people are saying that right now in Israel there is this big discussion about racism, about lack of tolerance toward each other, it's because the country is really young. And because it's only 67 years old, it takes the country time to build itself in a cultural way, education. And it seems that it's the same thing in South Africa. So maybe you can be free, but it doesn't mean that you will get the equal rights that you were fighting for in the same day, let's put it this way.
Lucy, thank you. I don't think the situation is at all comparable. You know, I watched on Yom Ha'atzmaut you going up and lighting the torch for the State of Israel. And that was a very proud moment. You were very emotional. I can tell you everybody in our household who were watching it were equally emotional. The tears were flowing. Because you represented not only yourself, and not only the Arab community and the Muslim Arab community, you represented me. You represented my family, and you represented everybody. And that was a proud moment. And I'm just wondering tomorrow being Freedom Day, who will proudly light and hold that flame of South Africa today? Because 20 years up the track, and you already listed some of the items over there, South Africa, rather than platitudes and flatulate over their achievements, really need to hold a mirror up to itself and really reflect on really where it is today and where it's going. So comparing it to Israel, I don't think at all is in any way comparable. Israel, with all its problems, and by God, it does have problems, and we know that, but we're working on it. There is a will of the people in Israel to resolve its problems. And the achievements over the last 60 years have been incredible.
This is what I'm saying. This is what I'm saying.
And yet
in the
South
same way
Africa,
that there is achievements, you can say that it's a young country, and you can understand why in a young country, 67 years old only, seeing all these achievements and still is not mature enough to deal with all the cultural differences that it's in. And on the same way, like what we're seeing in South Africa, it's the day that it reached, like just 21 years, it's nothing. 21 years to... it's not even a generation. Right.
The difference is it's 21 years already of an indigenous population, while Israel is a population of instant population. Most of the people here in Israel have come over the last wave after wave of aliyot with different languages, different cultures, and it's quite phenomenal that, bearing that in mind and having to face, unfortunately, wars along the way, yes, that it has achieved and reached a measure of really living together relatively peacefully. I think it could be an example to other people in other countries. Rather than look at Israel and criticize, people should look to Israel as a model as to how it's achieved. That's not to say we can't improve. We have a way to go.
So why it's not working in South Africa? How come South Africa didn't take itself and took this and said, okay, we suffered enough from racism and inequality, and just didn't take it one step forward? How come we're dealing with,
I think we have,
like we said...
You know, I said we have to hold up, or South Africa has to hold up the mirror and look at itself. And really, since Mandela, who South Africa was blessed to have in its formative years of leadership, it has really had poor leadership. Embarrassing leadership. Leadership that's corrupt, leadership that is taking the country rather than for the best interests of the people, but for themselves. And this is quite apparent with the kind of exorbitant salaries that people are paying themselves. It's a disgrace. And we saw what happened in the opening of Parliament only 2-3 months ago, where there was a walkout. Now, that's never really happened before, where people came with firearms. You know, in a parliamentary democracy, you're not allowed to have firearms in a parliament. They came in with firearms and escorted people out. So you can see that the dream of South Africa that we all had, and I remember voting in the first South African election over here in 1994. I mean, the will of the South Africans over here was really for a success story. And we can see how it's all unraveling, but very sadly.
You know, what I'm trying to understand is maybe in countries that for so long were not, let's say, raised and educated on democracy, like what is happening in Muslim countries and Arab countries, it takes time. It takes time. It takes time to build yourself. It takes time to change the way that you think. It takes time to look at yourself and to understand, by God, it takes time for us to look at ourselves and look at our mistakes.
Right. So on that, let me just say the following. You're quite right. And I left South Africa having been quite active politically in my day. I mean, I had my political science lecturer, Professor Rick Turner, shot by the assassins of the old apartheid regime, took a bullet in his forehead and died in front of his 2 daughters. When I studied law, my lecturer was running an underground press, and he was sentenced, and he actually marked my final exams in his cell. So that's the kind of background I came to when I came to Israel. And no sooner had I arrived, a project that really interested me was a project we called the Bait Barrel Project, which was a secret project to train future black leaders. Okay, people that were involved in it at the time were Jane Fonda from the American side, fundraising. We had Desmond Tutu from South Africa. We had Perez, and we had Yossi Balin from this side. It was run by a fellow by the name of Professor Zelnicke. We all got involved. It was a secret project to bring South Africans and train them then in community leadership for the day when they would eventually take over. And when I wrote an article, I think for the Jerusalem Post, years later when it all came out, I remember counting that there were 29 graduates from the Bait Barrel Project that became mayors of cities and towns in South Africa. Wow. You know, it's quite an achievement. And then when Mandela came into power, we shifted from community development to economic empowerment, and we shifted in training people in economic entrepreneurship and these kind of areas. So we really, I mean, South African Jews over here have really been at the forefront in really hoping and doing the best for South Africa and being involved in projects and encouraging them.
How much Nelson Mandela really changed South Africa?
The most he did was they didn't have a civil war. I mean, it was on the cards that there could have been, and yet he had this incredible personality, this incredible gravitas to really bring the people together. I don't know if you ever saw that movie Invictus about the rugby, okay? It's an iconic movie, and you can see it, that
Somebody
whole
is sitting in my ear right now that told me a lot about this.
Okay, so I mean, that personality, unbelievable, and he was an incredible guy. I mean, he was, and he kept it all together. Unfortunately, what followed after him were the greedy ones.
You know, I'm trying to, what if he was alive? What could he do?
Well,
Did he have any more effect?
No, I mean, I think that Mandela served his purpose for the period and for the time. And he had already reached that age. I mean, he was already in his 80s, I think. Okay. We need him then as an iconic figure to really take the people and believe in each other that it was the Rainbow Nation and that we could live together in peace. And he achieved that. What we needed afterwards were the smart technocrats who could then take it to the next level of providing housing, employment, these kind of areas which Mandela couldn't really, because he just wasn't of that age and genre at that time.
We didn't even start talking about, let's say, the role of the West in keeping South Africa in the way that it is.
Well, I think the West looked to South Africa to really be a model for Africa. I mean, there were great dreams and aspirations about South Africa because Africa as a continent hasn't really been a great success story. There have been pockets of success, but as a continent, it hasn't. It's been, you know, plagued by wars and malnutrition and inability to provide housing and so on and so forth. And South Africa didn't want to go the same way as Zimbabwe, which had been at one time the breadbasket and then became a basket case. And unfortunately, that may well be the case with South Africa if it doesn't affect change.
David Kaplan, thank you very, very much.
It was my pleasure.
It is my pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you, our viewers, for being with us tonight. Tomorrow we will be here at the same time, same place from the Jaffa Port, Israel. Have a great night.